Hi, thanks for joining me today. My name is Adrienne Markworth, and I'm the Executive Director of Leah's Pantry. Today, we're going to talk about adverse experiences, toxic stress, and how our relationship with food can promote resilience and compassion. Leah's Pantry is in San Diego, but also has a national footprint in the area of trauma-informed nutrition security. So we work at the intersection of trauma-informed care, public health nutrition, and food security. And this means that we are really interested in the root causes of food security, the root causes of poor health, and how the science of stress and trauma might help us to understand more deeply how to create healthy, vibrant communities. So the first thing we're going to talk about is stress and diet. We know that when we hear messages about our diet, they are all over the place. We get different messages from our healthcare provider, from the internet, from our friends. And what we also know is that sometimes the advice that we get is a little too simple, right? We hear if only you eat a perfect diet, you will be free of chronic disease. We call chronic disease diet-related disease for this reason. But we also know that the math does not always add up. For example, 10 to 15% of people that have type 2 diabetes are at a quote-unquote ideal weight. We also know that most people do not meet, in fact, something like 99% of Americans do not meet the dietary guidelines, yet not everybody is sick. So what are people doing right that's protecting them from chronic disease? So let's think about stress. We all understand the concept of stress. It's likely you have felt some stress today at some point. Maybe you were late for a meeting. Maybe you missed a deadline at work. Maybe you just woke up on the wrong side of the bed, right? We know what happens when we get stressed. Our pupils dilate, we might get a little sweaty, our heart rate increases, we become really focused, right? When I'm lost in San Diego in the car, which happens often, I have a terrible sense of direction, I immediately turn off the radio, tell my kids to stop talking, and become laser focused on getting to where I need to be on time, right? That's my body's stress response helping me get out of a jam. Now, if it's a normal everyday stress, I'm going to quickly regulate, I'm going to feel better, and then I'm going to go back to my more relaxed state where I'm able to do several things at one time and I'm not feeling that adrenaline rush. However, when we have a serious adversity or that adversity is chronic, it happens all the time, what happens then is sometimes our body has trouble regulating. So those stress hormones that are released when we have some adversity don't stop, right? We're bathed in them. And when we're unable to regulate, we overproduce them, and those stress hormones live in our cells, they break them down, and they make us vulnerable to external pathogens, which then causes all sorts of disruption in our development. So when this happens at key periods, especially in children's development, it has lasting and severe consequences on our neurobiology, and all sorts of other systems are at play. So this is a problem because it affects our cognition, it affects our memory, it can affect our decision-making skills, it can affect our moral decision-making skills, right? Being able to know right from wrong. It also sets us up to be in a situation where we are constantly trying to regulate. Well, let's get to food. What is one of the really quick ways that we can regulate? It's to eat something. And what is it? Salt, fat, sugar are really quick ways to get our bodies into a more regulated state. So biologically, this is a really appropriate response to stress, is grabbing that sugary drink, grabbing that bag of chips, and that will help us feel better in the moment. But when we do that all the time, when that becomes our default, then all of a sudden we've developed some health risk behaviors around our diet, which we then know are leading us to high rates of chronic disease, such as diabetes, in our communities. So as public health nutrition, we often focus on the behavior, right? The poor diet. How do we get people to eat healthier? Shop with a grocery list, read nutrition labels, switch those refined grains for whole grains. That's an educational model, and we can definitely get people excited about a healthy diet. We can definitely teach exciting recipes that are tasty, teach people shortcuts so that everything doesn't take so much time. But it doesn't always get to the root cause of the problem, which is that we are under a lot of stress and our bodies are just needing to constantly respond to stress. So that stress is sabotaging some of our best intentions around our diet. Another tricky piece of this: food itself can be a vehicle of adversity. Let's talk first about food insecurity, something that means we don't always know when that next meal is coming. We don't always have enough money for food the entire month. Food insecurity is an adverse experience which often results in trauma. When almost 40% of San Diegans are struggling at some point in the year with food insecurity, we know it's a big problem for our community. And luckily, San Diego takes food security very seriously, as it should. So when we think about preventing food insecurity, we're not only thinking about preventing hunger in an immediate sense, we're also preventing trauma. We're preventing chronic stress. We're allowing people to develop as they should, especially children, without the disruption that food insecurity can provide. There are other ways that food is implicated in trauma. So within the home, we can see manipulation and control when it comes to food. Sometimes even it has good intention behind it. A mother who might be really focused on feeding her child healthy foods, but maybe has a child who has a more refined and picky palate, can introduce damage into that relationship with food by forcing food down or by manipulating, punishing if the food isn't eaten. So even that healthy impulse can destroy our relationship with food, because we know food is a multi-dimensional aspect of our lives. It connects us socially, it connects us culturally, it also connects us to our health and our bodies. It connects us to beauty, right? We love to eat things that look beautiful. And so a very narrow frame around diet, seems crazy to think, can actually have a negative consequence on our diet. Right? So even our best intentions can sabotage the ability to really meet that for those that we care for. Policies can also damage that relationship with food. When we have a neighborhood without access to healthy food, when we welcome, for example, refugee populations and we don't have culturally available food for them, that becomes traumatic, because food is part of that cultural connection. And part of that cultural connection is going to protect us from stress. It's going to allow us to heal. We heal in relationship, we heal in connection. So all of these things are really important. So food is highly intertwined with stress. So what do we do? Well, the first thing we can say is look to yourself. What is your relationship with food? Think about the different dimensions of food that are present in your life. Do you love to go out to eat with friends, or perhaps Zoom out to eat with friends these days? Do you feel tremendous cultural connection around the food that you eat or know how to prepare, maybe around holidays or special occasions especially? Do you love to make beautiful dishes? Do you consider for your food to be a work of art? Maybe you're somebody that loves to post pictures of your meals on Instagram and celebrate that delicious sourdough bread that just came out of the oven. So think about that and think of all the ways that you can nurture that relationship. That's one thing. Another thing you can do is think about how you can interrupt that stress response. So you may have a stress response that frequently puts you in a situation where you might not be living the life that you would want to live to be the healthiest. You might be drawn to foods that otherwise you might not eat. You may not be able to exercise or move the way that you want to move because of your stress response. So there's lots of different ways to handle stress. There's lots of different ways that we can biologically regulate, right? We can look at mindfulness, we can look at meditation, we can look at social connection. So really exploring what options you have in your life to respond to stress and interrupt that stress response that's sabotaging what you want to do for your health. And the same goes for those that you care for. So those of you that are caregivers, how are you nurturing all the wonderful parts of that relationship with food for your family? How are you making sure that your kids are both eating healthy and loving food and loving making food and loving being in community with people when we're eating? So that can sometimes help take away some of that dinner table drama, is to say, okay, maybe they're not eating these vegetables that I lovingly prepared, but we're having a great conversation. And that's also something that I really want to celebrate in my family around food, is the ability to sit down at night and enjoy our time together. Maybe I'll work on those vegetables at a different time. Also thinking about ways that you can really teach those that you care for and care about ways to interrupt their own stress response. And really encourage mindfulness and self-awareness about when our bodies feel stressed and how we respond, and if there are ways to do that so that it doesn't sabotage our health. And then when we think about our communities, right, what can you do to provide more protection and healing in our communities? You might think, I want my community to have a healthier diet. I want people to have less chronic disease. And then what do I do? Well, one thing you can do is try and reduce the stress in your community. How can you advocate for things that you think would provide stress relief and healing, whether that's safe spaces to congregate, whether that is classes in the community like exercise classes, whether that's high quality child care, whether that's social connections, a thriving small business environment where people feel that they know one another when they go shopping, for example. So these are all just kind of random suggestions, but the point is that sometimes to affect a healthier diet, we need to back up and think about a protective community, because we know that when we're not constantly under stress, we will be able to use the healing power of food, and it becomes a virtuous cycle. So nutrition is also protective, but sometimes it's hard to get started with a nutritious diet when we're constantly feeding that stress response. So there's a lot that you can do both for yourselves, for those that you care about, in your community. Thanks so much for listening today.